Hello and welcome to Post, the channel where we discuss all things hockey. My name's Neil, and we're here for a very special episode today. I have my father on the show, and he supported me my entire childhood growing up and playing hockey, and he's the sole reason why I am a hockey fan originally, and I wouldn't be here without him. So, Dad, welcome to the show,
Thanks for having me.
and we're here to talk about you, but more specifically your love for the Montreal Canadiens.
Right on.
Can you tell me your short answer as to why you are a Montreal Canadiens fan?
Reason number one, I was born 6.5 miles from center ice at the Montreal Forum in the west end of Montreal in a suburb called Lachine. I grew up in Montreal and I lived there until I was 15 years old. And my dad, before me, was a Montreal Canadiens fan and gave me a lot of exposure to the team. So it's my home team. I'm a Montreal boy, and they're my boys.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your dad. Can you tell me a little bit about him and his relationship with the team?
Yeah, Dad was in the food service industry when he moved to Montreal in 1956. I came along a couple of years after that. But Dad's business in the 60s and early 70s was servicing restaurants and concessions. And many of his customers were in the Montreal Forum. So he was in and out of the Forum a lot, delivering product, fixing machines, because mostly he was in the coffee business. And he got to know the restaurant owners, the concessionaires there, some of the security people, I suppose. And he would end up with free tickets from time to time, and he would take me to some games. I was really young for some of them, and I don't remember them, but for some of the others, I do have a couple of vivid recalls. But yeah, he was surrounded by hockey as well. Also, my parents had friends in their social circles that were connected in some way with the team. One of their friends was a gentleman by the name of Bert Mosdell, whose brother Ken played for the Canadiens in the 40s and 50s and won 4 cups with Montreal. And we had other, acquaintances that weren't too far from the team itself. And Montreal Canadiens ambiance was all around us where we lived as well. So yeah,
So you lived in Lachine, just outside of Montreal, or a suburb of Montreal.
yeah.
Did you live close to any players, or?
Yeah, I lived close to a few. In the 1970s, early 70s, Larry Robinson and Claude LaRose lived not too far away, and one of my acquaintances at school shoveled their driveways. So I never saw them around or anything, but they were nearby. So we had active players in the neighborhood. We had a lot of retired players around as well. Phil Goyette, who would be a name many Montreal fans my age and older might remember. He lived just down the street from where I lived. And Yvan Cournoyer, his junior career had some Lachine orbit to it as well. He played in the same rink a little bit that I played in when I played my little bit of minor hockey when I was in grade 5. So it's all around you. I think probably every neighborhood around Montreal has players somewhere nearby and has some personal connection they can make with the team.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned that your father took you to some games, and I can say that we've been to a few games. So how many games have you seen, do you think, in your lifespan, and what teams have you seen?
I don't know how many I would have been at with Dad. Probably at least a half a dozen, as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple that stand out quite vividly because I was older at the time. I remember one game in particular he took me to, which was the Oakland Seals game, be early 1969, I think January. We ended up winning the game. The Montreal Canadiens, ended up winning the game 8-4. And I just remember that game more so for, well, the goal total that the team racked up was impressive. I also remember from that game the uniforms that Oakland was wearing were just the worst things I'd ever seen in my life. And this was just post original six expansion. We're talking a year or two into the new world of more teams, and nobody from the West Division, the St. Louis Blues, I think, were
Right.
habitually the first opponent in the Stanley Cup Finals for the first few years, and they were just slaughtered each time.
Yeah.
And the Oakland Seals never got anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that game vividly, I think, for that reason, just the gaudy uniforms, and I would be like, just 8 years old or 9 years old at the
Yeah.
time. But it wasn't my first time at the Forum. I knew that, like I'd been there before, so I don't remember how many games prior to that.
Okay.
I remember another game, Montreal and Boston. It was the last game of the regular season. I was a little disappointed because both teams were resting their better players because the playoffs were coming up and the game didn't mean anything.
Right.
The standings weren't going to change. So I didn't see, the Bellevaux and all that that I wanted to see. And
Right.
Bobby Orr was playing that game, but there were obviously still some players, and it was a game that Montreal also won. I had a good record going to Montreal games, even when I started taking you.
Yeah.
You know, it was quite a while before we saw a loss.
Yeah. Well, I think we've seen 4 games, and I think Montreal's won every single one of those. We've watched them beat Hartford, and they beat Atlanta, and they beat Carolina, and they beat Philly.
I don't think they beat Carolina. I think we lost to Carolina in overtime.
Really?
Or a shootout.
We might have to check that.
Yeah, we might have to check that. I think we came away from that. That's the game that we went to that we had such a hard time getting back home because of a airplane problem.
Right. Then that's another story for another time.
Yes.
But so what? I think you mentioned Beliveau just there. You would consider him your all-time favorite player?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jean Beliveau was a gentleman and a really good player and a supreme leader. And every kid, you know, we're playing road hockey in Montreal, you know, in the spring, especially when the snow would go. Everybody wanted to be Beliveau, and
Yeah.
Beliveau would pass to Beliveau. It was he was a god.
Yeah, and he was number 4.
Number 4.
And you were born on December 4th.
Yeah, as it turned out. Yeah.
And coincidentally, that is also the same birthday of the Montreal Canadiens.
The Montreal Canadiens were created on December the 4th, 1909. I didn't know until the 100th anniversary was approaching in 2009.
Right.
Of what date they were born on. And then it started to come out in the news as to what day the actual 100th anniversary was. And it was my 50th birthday. So I was born on the 50th birthday of the Montreal Canadiens, and they celebrated their centennial on my 50th birthday. And I didn't know any of that for all the time I was, you know, growing up and becoming a super fan. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
Very special.
Yeah. And so what would you consider your most favorite memory of the Montreal Canadiens, or any game you've seen or any experience you've had around the team?
I think I have 2 that really stand out. The 1971 Stanley Cup win over Chicago, very improbable for Montreal to even make it that far. And Montreal was down in Game 7, 2-0, and came back and scored 3 goals and won the game 3-2 in Game 7. And I remember that game. It's important because it was a first Stanley Cup win in our new house that we had bought in the west end of Lachine. Dad and I were watching the game together. I have a very vivid recall of watching that final game and how thrilling it was and how happy we were that they'd come back and won Game 7 and won yet another Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Back then, Stanley Cups were coming pretty easy.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's been so long now since we won one. But I did some math just getting ready for this chat with you, Neil.
Yeah.
And, by the time I was 26 years old, Montreal had won 11 Stanley Cups in my lifetime. And by the time you were 26 years old, they'd only won 2 in your lifetime. And so you and I have vastly different experiences with
unfortunately
Montreal's rate of success.
Yes, they won in '86, the year I was born, and then again in '93, and I remember neither.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier, but you said that I fell asleep on the couch for the '93 victory, so I have absolutely no memory of that, and that's unfortunate. And we were also talking about we feel bad for Toronto fans because I'm 30 now, and I don't remember the Canadiens winning the Stanley Cup, but there are Toronto fans who have been alive for
50 years.
For 50 years or however many years, and they've never seen the Toronto Maple Leafs win the cup, whether they're awake or asleep. So
that's right. And then my second greatest memory of Montreal winning was '93. After the '71 win,
right.
I think '93 win was the next best one. And for reasons that we've discussed already, you were on the couch that night. You wanted to stay up. It was Game 5. I certainly wanted you to stay up. You fell asleep. Maybe if I'd been a better dad, it would have, kept poking at you to keep you awake, but you probably wouldn't have appreciated that. And of course, at that time, I thought, well, you'll see them next year. It's not a big deal. But it turns out to be a very big deal now. But the neat part about the '93 win, even though we weren't living in Montreal, and I hadn't lived in Montreal at that point for almost 20 years, I was on my way to Montreal the next day already to go to the Grand Prix Formula One race with my brother. And I had a big old VHS video camera that I was going to take anyhow just to document the trip. And to see our old neighborhood, we were going to do a bit of a grand tour of the suburbs. Anyway, we ended up there in Montreal. We landed there, drove, but we arrived late in the evening of the first day after they'd won the cup, and the broken glass was still on St. Catherine Street, and it was the town was very, very much a big buzz. And within a day or two after that, there was the Stanley Cup parade, and we made sure we attended that. So I stood on the street corner, basically at the intersection of Sherbrooke Street and Côte-des-Neiges, where the parade was going to end. And when they got to Côte-des-Neiges, the parade was going to drive up that street and then just disperse. So we got to see that final turn. I positioned myself between two parked cars, and as the police went by and started sweeping all the people away from the head of the parade, they had nowhere to go except past me. So when everything went past, there I was between these two parked cars, and all the floats went by right in front of me. I got them all on camera.
Wow, that's awesome.
So I got Patrick Waugh with the Conn Smythe Trophy, and Guy Carbonneau. On my video, he's just putting the Stanley Cup back down after having held it up. And then he comes over though, but he's waving, and you can recognize, you can see Jacques Laperriere, who at the time was with the team. He was in a suit, but he was wearing a Habs hat, and he wasn't a player by then, but he was a legacy player for Montreal, a great guy. And to be there for that was just beyond words. I was so excited.
Cool. And you told me the story the other day of you going into the Montreal Canadiens fan shop or whatever it was called. And you got your hat, which you have there now, and you can show that to the camera.
Yeah, bought this hat. That we had an amazing day after the win when all this product started coming out. And this hat says 1993 Stanley Cup champions, Montreal Canadiens. Bought the hat. It's the hat that a lot of the team was wearing in the parade when you see the video. And I was going into the gift shop to get this hat and a few other things, and coming out the door when I was going in was Gary Lehman, who was at that time a member of the team, who had just won the Stanley Cup himself. And he was in the gift shop buying stuff, probably for family and friends. But he was coming out just as we were going in, and I recognized him because he had this big scrape on his chin that probably happened during one of the games. And he was a tall guy, and I recognized him right away anyway. But it was definitely Gary Lehman. He was on his way out when we were going in. And no one else seemed to be aware of who he was, in my recollection anyway. Yeah, so I got this hat. Also got a T-shirt. I still have it, although it doesn't fit anymore for some reason. It must have shrunk a lot. But it says, the T-shirt is a white T-shirt, and the whole length of the T-shirt is the front page of the Montreal Gazette the next day. And the headline was "Cup Comes Home." And at that time, that's where the Stanley Cup was in Montreal.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And now it's homeless.
Yeah. So we've talked about your favorite memories and growing up and stuff. Lots of good memories. And to change the mood, what's your worst memory of the Montreal Canadiens? Like, I know in '89 they came pretty close with Calgary, and that must have been tough to watch.
It was tough to watch because at that time I still hated Toronto, and I hated everyone not only who played for Toronto, but who used to play for Toronto. And I hated Lanny McDonald for no good reason. And Lanny McDonald was like the superstar of that game.
Right.
That game they won the game, I think, in Montreal. So they had to watch Calgary walk the cup around, in the Forum. And that was just devastating. There was another devastating time earlier on. This would be probably in the late 70s. Montreal, I think, had a series with the Minnesota North Stars, which eventually became the Dallas Stars, if I'm not mistaken, and they lost that series, and they shouldn't have. And I was just, because that was a year I really thought they were going to do something. Whatever year it was, I don't exactly recall.
Right.
The overtime loss to Boston a couple of years ago, Game 7.
Right. Yeah.
In the playoffs, I was just devastated because and I think any fan of hockey, when their team starts to go a little bit deep, they start to get past the first round and you start to believe something might happen.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't happen, it guts you. It just guts you. So yeah, and I've been through a few of those. I'm almost happier. We've had this discussion in the past. I'm almost happier when Montreal, if they're not going to win the cup, I'd rather they not even get in the playoffs.
Yeah, same.
Don't give me false hope. Don't distract me from just enjoying hockey.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because if my heart is in the thing, then I know I'm almost certainly dedicated or destined for heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I don't want that.
Yeah, and my best and worst memory come from the same year, the same time. I think it was 2010, so 7 years ago, and Montreal came in, I think, 8th or 7th, and they had to play Washington in the first round, and obviously Washington was the favorite, and Montreal won in 7 games, a very emotional win, and I think every Montreal Canadian was in shock but very happy. And then Montreal had to go on and play Pittsburgh, an equally difficult opponent, and that series went to 7 games as well, which just that alone surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
And Montreal beat Pittsburgh in Game 7, and that I just remember thinking this could be the year. Like, Montreal has beat Pittsburgh, they've beat Washington. This is pretty awesome.
Who's next?
Yeah, who's next? And they went on to play Philadelphia, and I think everyone was thinking that Montreal would get past Philadelphia, and even Philadelphia fans were probably scared of Montreal because they were the underdog and they were just on a roll. And that series was really disappointing. It was pretty pathetic and unfortunate. And that, my best and worst memory. My best memory of them going on a run between and winning 2 series that they never should have won, and losing a series that they should have won. So.
And that seems to be how they've been playing lately. Like they really bring it for tough games against really good teams. Then they'll play Buffalo, and lose 3-1 or something.
Yeah, they're very inconsistent.
Very inconsistent. But I remember that season very well too. Your mother and I were on a cruise in the Caribbean on that first Montreal-Washington game. And on the cruise ship, way down there was no coverage of hockey, and the little TV you have in your stateroom has no ability to cover live sports. And I remember waking up early the next morning thinking, okay, how bad was it? And then turning on the TV and finding out I think they won 6-5 or so, it was some high scoring
They won
game.
in overtime 4-3 or something like that.
Yeah, and I remember jumping out of bed, and hooping, and your poor mother was not happy.
Yeah, I don't imagine. So, I guess that transitions into the current Montreal Canadiens. How do you feel about the team? And like you said, like we just said, they're pretty inconsistent. But how do you feel about the team? And we were talking about the reputation of a lot of current Montreal Canadiens fans. How do you feel about the team, the fans, and the future of the Canadiens? When do you think that they'll bring the cup home to Montreal next?
I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. I think that if Montreal wins the Stanley Cup in the next couple of years, it'll probably be another one of those unlikely runs where, they'll finish midpoint in the standings. They're not going to be the favorite. They'll pull off some games they shouldn't win, probably. People you've never heard of will step up and become stars for that run in the playoffs. And they could go all the way. They have all the ingredients. I think, almost every team, if you put the right people in place, have all the ingredients at a given point in time. They've got Carey Price. If there are other people come back and get healthy, Galchenyuk and Markov, who knows what they could do. I would not put I'd never bet on my team anyway. I just don't think that's right. But I wouldn't put a lot of faith in a cup this year, but I wouldn't have in 93 and I wouldn't have in 86 either.
That's true.
These are different times. So you just don't know. The playoffs are a whole new season.
Yeah.
When the playoffs begin, the regular season then just looks like farm team stuff. It looks like preseason, didn't really matter stuff. Once you're in and you're locked in, you never know.
Yeah, it's definitely a different compete level.
Definitely.
And just not just for the players, for the fans too. It's a different atmosphere. It's a different buzz around all the cities, and it's pretty special to watch, regardless of who's playing. Playoff hockey is probably the most exciting thing I've ever seen on TV.
Yeah, and to be in a city when the playoffs are going on, it's intense, and it's especially intense in Montreal because the second part of your question was about the fans. In one of your earlier vlogs, you talked about how you didn't want to be considered as one of those typical Montreal fans that everyone hates, and I totally identify with that comment, because as much as I love Montreal, I watch them hopefully from a objective detachment situation, and I don't go crazy. I'm not, I'm not the first one to judge them. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and just let things slide. I do love when another team makes a really, really good play. And I think a lot of Montreal fans are really like that. Every fan base has its idiots. Montreal probably has more than most.
Yeah.
But I think still the majority of Montreal fans, I remember the first game that Toronto played in Montreal this season. And Austin Matthews did, I guess it was only an exhibition game if I'm not mistaken. It was like preseason. But Austin Matthews did some crazy great play. And the fans in Montreal were like, wow, that was really good. And I think, it must be hard for the officials when they're officiating a game in Montreal, because you've got 21,400 referees in the stands
Yeah.
that are watching every single thing you do or not do. And it must be hard for officials. It must be hard for other teams to come in and to go into this cathedral.
Yeah.
It's really, this is the center of hockey on the planet Earth, in my view. And Montreal fans there's probably not a fan anywhere, or a group of fans anywhere on the planet, that knows more about hockey than the Montreal Canadiens fans. Now, that can be a bad thing too.
And we're definitely a passionate bunch, and a lot of us in a negative way, and that's actually why some players don't agree to come to Montreal, because I think probably mostly because of the media. But if you come to Montreal and you don't perform, you won't hear the end of it until you're out of Montreal.
That's right.
And even after you're gone from Montreal, you'll still hear the boos. So
you will hear the boos, and Montreal fans can turn on you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
The team can be up 6-1 in a game, and it's late in the third, and they get a power play, and they stink on the power play, and the fans start booing.
Yeah.
Like there's it's not all the fans, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Just relax,
Yeah.
people, please.
So it's Montreal could go on a run, like you said, when they're not supposed to win, or they could come first in the East in the next few years and not do anything in the playoffs. They're very inconsistent.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's probably going to be the future moving forward for a while. I mean, I don't know how their prospects look, but it could be a very frustrating next decade or two.
It could be. There were, not that long ago, Montreal, I think, got the 5th draft pick because they had finished so poorly in the standings. And the previous year, I think they had come first in the standings.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like. It's a roller coaster ride. I'm encouraged by the fact that we have Marc Bergevin, who's running the team.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy who built the Chicago Blackhawks. And if you look at even the 100 best players ever in the NHL, Duncan Keith, Jonathan Toews, and Patrick Kane skate out. These are all people that Bergevin would have engineered arriving in Chicago at the time. And there they are, and they're still anchoring that team and will for a long time to come.
Yeah.
If he can pull off the same core excellence of players in Montreal that he did with Chicago, that's really what I think Montreal fans want. I don't think they want another 86 or another 93 where they puck-lucked it out and fluked it. They want a dynasty to come back.
Yeah, they want a sustainable team that performs each and every year and doesn't play with your emotions. Like last year was pretty pathetic.
It was terrible.
They underperformed.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can blame Carey Price's injury all you want, but you can't win the Stanley Cup with one player. You need the entire team, whether Carey Price is there or not. So it's a different dynamic on Montreal than a lot of teams. A lot of teams are quite deep, and I think I would consider Montreal pretty deep as well, especially this year. But a lot of attention is paid to Carey Price and his success or his failures. He's having a bit of a cold streak right now, and the media's all over him kind of about it.
They are, but Montreal still, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10 games or something, even with Price not being, the god. The other, they are deep because they have so many players out that your fourth line types are playing second line time. And there's more players coming in, and they just need the rough edges sanded off. And they're, Andrighetto and Delarose and people like that. They could be the next phase or the next wave.
Yeah.
And if you wait long enough, even a player that seems to be a slow learner like Alexei Emelin, he becomes, a key component of the defense. And, I don't know how much time we have to wait for these players to all develop. And on the other end of the game, you've got Markov, who, has a very limited time span left.
He's 38 or something like that.
Yeah,
So.
and, for a defenseman, if you're smart and you don't move a lot and you still know where to pass the puck, you're still valuable for a while. But there comes a point when everyone has to hang him up.
Yeah.
And, I dread that day when it comes along. But we don't have what we had when I was a kid, in the 70s. You don't have the big three like we'd want to have.
Yeah.
But, so you're right. It's going to be probably a little more emotional roller coaster before things stay on a steady trajectory.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, but, we'll see what happens. And I guess that's where we'll end today's episode. And definitely first, thank you for coming on the show. And I'm sure that the people watching enjoyed this episode because you're a great speaker and you've got some good stories. And And I myself appreciate you coming on and spending the time with me. And we're about to film a few other episodes, so you at home, look out for those. They'll be coming shortly after this video. I'm not sure exactly how many days after this video, but thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you come back for the next one. If you're not subscribed, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment and tell us what you thought of this episode. And we'll see you for the next video. Adios.